Hey, welcome everyone to the ARCHICAD User Monthly Webinar for December 2019, the end of the decade. My name is Eric Bobrow, and I'm speaking to you from San Rafael, California, and it's my pleasure to share with you some of my knowledge and insights and experience in using ARCHICAD. Let me know that you can hear me and that you can see my screen with just the currently just the 7 keys to best practices is what I'm showing. You can please also tell me where you're calling in from. That's always fun. If you are in one of my training programs, then please use the Slack workspace under coaching calls, and that'll be where we communicate. And for those of you who don't know what that is, Slack is a great conversation discussion tool. Lots of people and companies use it around the world. We use it for those who are involved in my training and coaching to have a dedicated area for discussion and sharing resources such as even, sample projects or other things, questions. So I see Christophe from France, Glenn from New Zealand, Tom from Vancouver, Nicole from Berkeley, Tekle from Vancouver. All right, so we're spanning certainly several continents here. And Ken, I know you're in Arizona, I believe, and Zlatko from Sydney, Rick from Tokyo. Okay, so we've got North America, Australia, Europe, and Asia. Okay, so we're almost there. I don't know if we often have people from South America as well, and occasionally even from Africa. So we span the globe. All right, so what are we going to do today? As I announced the subject of ARCHICAD basics, tips and tricks, I started thinking, what are the common questions and issues that new users have? What are the things that make a difference in terms of using ARCHICAD effectively? And I came up with a variety of sort of, I should demonstrate this and I should demonstrate that, and here's a tip that a lot of people will benefit from. So I will do some of that, but then I realized I have this whole, let's say, presentation that I used to do frequently called the 7 keys to best practices for ARCHICAD, and I thought, let me do a short version of that to lead this off, because these really are principles that help not only new users, but users of all levels. When you remember the best practices principles and you use them, you definitely are able to get more benefit from ARCHICAD. I originally created this over 10 years ago, I think back in 2007 or 8, and then it became the inspiration for my best practices training course, which I launched in 2010, 2011, and continues to be the inspiration, the idea of best practices and key principles as I develop new training materials such as the 2020 training course, which I've been working on this past year and will continue into the actual year 2020, which reminds me that if you are looking to expand your abilities in ARCHICAD in 2020, I have a special sale on right now. Just set up the page. It is the actual location is archicadtraining.com/sale. So intended to be pretty easy. And what you'll see is that there are special deals to save 25%, 50% or more on training bundles and coaching and master template. And then I'm also featuring my collaboration with John Hallgarth of ContraBIM for the ARC5D estimating solution for ARCHICAD, which has a training course and a hybrid template that builds on his work and my work together. And then, of course, you can get both of those, the course and the template together. So archicadtraining.com/sale. The current sale will go on through the year end. So if you're looking to have 2020 be a fantastic year for you in terms of using ARCHICAD, check that out. All right, enough of the advertisement for now. And let's see here. So let's look at the 7 keys to best practices. Oh, by the way, I see Eric Lutz from Africa and Ender Aiden from Turkey, Heather from Monterey, and Juan Jose. I'm not sure where you're from. Okay, so we are in Africa as well, and ARCHICAD certainly is used around the world. Okay, so what are these keys? These are general concepts for thinking about using ARCHICAD. In fact, they probably apply pretty generally to a lot of efforts, workflow in many areas. So they are general principles, and then we'll look a little bit at how they get applied in ARCHICAD. So the first thing is getting organized. If you're better organized, you're going to be able to get more benefit from the tools. You'll waste less time. Part of getting organized is doing it once. And what I mean by that is if it takes a while to set something up and you can do it once and then reuse that, then of course that saves you time. This applies in a variety of ways, including things like favorites, where you set up your walls or your objects or your window the way you want it, or one way that you want it, and then you save that as a favorite so that you can quickly reinstate or activate those settings to draw something. But it also goes in terms of templates, because templates are a way of starting your project, and the more you have done in one place, or at least over time in that template, the less you have to do each project. Saving your settings is certainly something I mentioned here, and that is, whatever it takes to set something up, whether it's preferences or object settings or the settings within your project, save them so that they can be reused. Now, working from the general to the specific is a concept that all of us are familiar with in design. You start out with some general ideas, general layout of spaces, general arrangement of things, general concept. And then you get more specific. You start to say, we'll use this wall type here. This is going to be a certain clearance. We need a certain amount of space for this function. You then start to pin down that design in 2D and in space and numbers like areas, as well as specifically in geometry and of course getting into the intricacies of beauty as well, and elegant design. When you're working from the general to the specific, if you approach ARCHICAD in the right way, you won't have to redo a lot of your work. You'll simply refine that work. And so that's a concept that we'll look at actually in a little bit of detail later on. Now, using ARCHICAD structure, all of this fits in with these the other principles. Everything's really interlinked. But a classic example I give is that if you are placing a drawing on a sheet and you realize that, I need to change the title of the drawing on the sheet. If you change it there, it'll work. You'll be able to output the drawing. But in the view map, where you have derived the view or created the view that goes onto the sheet, if you don't change the name there, then it may be a little bit hard to see. You might have things with the same name. I've seen people, for example, say save view and place on layout. That's a nice convenient way to quickly get whatever you're looking at onto a sheet, but it may just have a generic name like first floor, and you might have 5 or 10 or more that say first floor. And then on the sheets, you have the title. Well, if you go back or think ahead and make that view have a name, like first floor reflected ceiling plan or site plan, etc., then these will actually flow forward in ARCHICAD structure from the view name to the drawing name. So if you change it once in the right place, it flows down. And in fact, in many cases, you can change that name in the project map. When you place a marker for an elevation or for a detail, you can define the name. That becomes the name of the view. it becomes a name on the layout sheet. So that's using the structure is one example. Now, modeling well, drawing less, well, ARCHICAD has always been a 3D tool from the very beginning. Now, I started it with ARCHICAD in 1989 with version 3.4. So even in version 1 in 1984, I believe it was, it was a 3D tool. And so modeling was essentially what ARCHICAD was about. Getting drawings out was something that developed through the next few years. And by the time I started working with it in 89, people were taking the models and creating working drawings. Obviously, it was a cruder, more limited process, and more was done in 2D than it is now. But the more that you model, obviously, the less you have to draw, because ARCHICAD will draw it for you in each view. And so in general, that concept is important to remember, and in fact, to push your comfort level as you work. Now, keeping it safe is just a general approach that I, as a consultant, have ended up having to teach people when they have problems, how you keep things safe. It really is, how do you make sure that you don't lose your work if there is a problem, if your computer closes down suddenly, if your hard drive goes out, if your client says, oh, that thing that we worked on last month, can I see that again? You don't want to have lost things that you've done. So in general, how do you organize backups? How do you organize versions of your project so that you can restore or open earlier versions and in fact not lose work if the program has a crash? That's become less of an issue because we do have autosave in the background, works pretty well. But let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail here. Let's see. This is a diagram, obviously, that is intended to give a little bit more of a sense of the connectivity between these 7 keys. I believe it's available on this particular URL here, but I will create another place. I'll post that in the links underneath this video in YouTube and on the ARCHICAD user website, because I'll probably put it on archicadtraining.com/7-keys. I think that's probably where I'll end up putting it. But let's just take a look a little bit more, getting organized, making it easy to access things. That helps you then to do it once. And if you're smart, once is enough. In many cases, saving your settings allows you to reuse what you can. Working from the general to the specific is an interesting thing. We'll look at some of that in detail within ARCHICAD, but by recording your design intent, it will help ARCHICAD to know what you want. So a classic example is if you want a window to be centered between 2 walls, then you can put it in and anchor it by the center point. And then if you change your mind about the window and make it bigger or smaller, that center point is the place that ARCHICAD will maintain. So your intent was to center it. In the same way with a door, perhaps you want to say that the corner of the door is a certain distance, certain number of inches or centimeters from the corner of the wall where the 2 walls meet. And then if the door changes from a narrower one to a wider one, that corner is your design intent that it retains. We went through ARCHICAD structure and going with the flow, basically saying, hey, if we make a change in one place, that's the right place, it'll flow downhill or flow naturally to other places. And this goes in a lot of different areas. So I think these will be more interesting when I demonstrate them than just talking in more detail. But this diagram and the little bit of examples and bullets below are going to be helpful. So I'll set this up so that you can download it. The better you do 3D, the less you have to draw. In fact, we have people like Tim Ball in the UK who basically state that pretty much all the time, all of his drawings are 3D. So even the detailed drawings are 3D because, of course, there's annotation. you know, there's text and dimensions and things, but everything that is a building element is drawn in 3D as opposed to drawing in, you know, just the smaller elements, the details in 2D. He pushes the limits more than most, but I think it's a good thing to aim for. And keeping it safe, don't risk losing your work. All right, so let us see then within ARCHICAD how some of these things work. And I won't stay tied into the 7 keys organizational structure directly. I'm going to now start looking at just some general concepts that I think users, particularly newer users, get confused about, and that everybody can benefit from review. So I'm just looking to see if there are any comments. So feel free to give me some comments or questions while I'm running. I will from time to time look over and see if I can help you out. So I see, all right, so Tom Palmer says, if you have time today, do you know how to place a dimension string at an exact distance from a wall without using the auto dimension tool? Okay, well, I know how to place things at exact distances from each other, absolutely. So let's just see how that might work. The auto dimension tool is a great one because you can select a whole bunch of walls and have it automatically place the dimensions at specific distances between each other. But there's no sort of quick instant like place. You have to actually measure it. So for example, if I drop the dimension tool, so now I'm ready to put in dimensions, and I go and say click on 2 points. Well, actually, let's zoom in a little bit, and do I want a dimension to the core or do I want a dimension to the surface? Well, let's just say the core is probably the most interesting, and I click 2 points. Now, if I double click anywhere, now I'm ready to nail in that dimension. Now, of course, I can put it visually wherever I want. Now, there isn't a feedback that says, hey, you've moved it away from those elements a certain distance. So if you did want to get it a specific distance away, I might put it on that location. Well, actually, what we need to do is put it somewhere parallel to that, like on that line. Oh no, okay, so we have a little bit of an issue just in the sense that when I click on a line, like an edge of a wall, it's actually putting in references to both sides. And let me just unclick these here by clicking them again. So we get rid of those. So how would we get this as a specific distance? Well, in this case, it looks like I can't really say the exact point, but if I put it on here, if I double click and, okay, so I'm getting stuck here. Let's just try one more time. We click on a point, click on another point here, double click to say I want to put it in and now get it in line. I guess if I now click on this, did I get a dimension? Yes, it is actually here. This dimension is hidden. You can see that there is a line across there. That was what was confusing. So I placed it right on top, and then if I were to drag it, just do the drag command and take this down, you know, I could say that I wanted it to be 5 feet away here. So that is 5 feet away. So it's a little bit cumbersome. If you wanted to have another line that was another distance away, what I can do is I can drag, I do Command D or Control D from here, and I can use the Option or Control key to say I want to make a copy. So now I've got another dimension that is being added. And of course I can type in, hey, I'd like it to be 1 foot apart there. Now you may say, why would I ever want to have 2 dimensions that are exactly the same, you know, repeated? Well, once you have a dimension, you can, with it selected, Command or Control click on another element, and you can see how it's adding in that chain or adding to that chain. And of course I can go and Command or Control click on a window and get this, you know, get it dimension to other points, not just walls. So anyway, that was a little diversion there. Ultimately, there's no instant way to just say, hey, put dimensions 5 feet away from the building or a specific distance apart unless you use the auto dimension. Okay, so let's just get rid of these extra ones there. All right, so Emil says, is there a way to edit dimensions by using grips? Can do it in AutoCAD so easily, cannot do it in ARCHICAD, and he's mentioned 17. So edit dimensions by using grips. Well, grips, the equivalent in ARCHICAD would be handles. You select a dimension as a whole by going to the edge of it with the arrow tool or the shift key. Now, we do have some hotspots here. I'll just zoom out a little bit. These are highlighted. They are the handles. Now, I can't actually say pull this over to make the reference of the building wider. You know, this would be making the building, you know, instead of 3 feet along this area, some other distance. Why is that? Well, in part because if I were to change this distance here, then what is going to move? Is it going to be just this one wall? Is it going to stretch that wall? Is it going to affect the back wall? Is it going to move the cabinets, etc.? So we can't really change it that way. But if you're talking about what I just did, where I wanted to dimension, instead of, I mean, this is a little arbitrary, but instead of going to this point, maybe I really wanted to go to that point, I can have this chain here and command click or control click on another point, and then I can get rid of the intermediate point if I don't want it by selecting that point and deleting it, and you can see how it combines. So I'm not quite sure what options there are in AutoCAD in terms of editing a dimension by grips, but we can grab individual parts of a dimension, like, for example, this measurement, and move it into position. Sometimes you need to move it to get it around other annotation, etc. And you can, of course, just move the entire dimension in or out, and everything moves along with it. So let me just undo those here, but I do appreciate these questions, and hopefully I'm hitting some interesting points along the way. Okay, so Tom says, that's the way I have been doing it. Another way I found is to place a guideline first. Absolutely, that's a good idea. So if we were to do a guideline, so let's just talk a little bit about guides, because guides are so important to clean drawing and getting the desired design laid out. So guides, just in general, if we go to tips and tricks for newer users, guides are shown or hidden based on the this control here. So guidelines you can turn on or off. Let's just drag a guideline in to a location like this. If I click here, I can turn them off, click again, turn it back on. So it's still there, but it just gets hidden. Now I can drag a guideline if I hover over it and go to its handle. So then I can move this, and I can move it a specific distance. In this case, I didn't pay attention to the distance. Let me just put it back to the edge. So if I go and grab this, and you can see the tracker is showing a distance, and I can just type in the letter D for distance, or R for the radius would also work, and then type in a value, say 5 feet. And that is going to be an offset 5 feet away from where I started, which I believe was the surface of that wall there. And you can you know, work with these guides using these little wells, I think they may call it. So these little indicators at the top, bottom, and sides of the screen, if you turn the guidelines off, they disappear. If you turn them on, then they're available. And there are lots of other things you can do with guides, of course, but once you have some guides, you will have snap points at intersections of those guides. Well, I could go into a whole demonstration of guides, but let's get on to, let me just check other questions that have come in. Hotspots come in handy for dimensions. Okay, so you can put hotspots. So some people are unaware that there is this little hotspot tool. So, little beginner tip. The hotspot tool is something that you can activate from the More palette. Sometimes this is closed up. Sometimes you need to open it up. The hotspot tool allows you to place non-printing node points or snap points. You can see how this snap point, my cursor changes when I hover over it. Now I just clicked and placed it arbitrarily at a location, but you can actually ask ARCHICAD to project these things or place them where you want. And you can literally go and drag this. I can drag this hotspot. I can drag this to any location, perhaps, to mark this intersection. And now that intersection is marked even if I were to turn off guidelines or get rid of those guidelines, I still have a snap at this point here. Okay, so I see a question on in the Slack channel asking how to access the free webinar. So I'm going to just give a link to that person here. Let me just see. I can say invite here. All right, so I've now answered that question. All right, so Matt Edema says, can I get a video on the previous tutorial? So in general, what you'll find is that I have two types of tutorials. Let's see, probably the biggest, well, one easy thing to do is to go look me up on YouTube, and you will see that I have a lot of tutorials on my channel here. In fact, one thing I'm very proud of is that we're reaching 3,976,000 views. So within a few more weeks, I'll be at 4 million views for how many videos are there? I don't even know. I think there's close to 100 videos there. So you can go look through there. You can also search within it for, like guide. And if you type in guide here, then you'll see some things about guidelines. Now, these are just an excerpt of all of the videos that I've created, because most of them, or let's say a majority of them, are for members of my courses. And as a quick reminder back, you can get involved in one of my courses for a pittance if you go to archicadtraining.com/sale. All right, enough of that. Oh, actually, I just realized I was looking at one screen, but you were looking at the other. So let me just go back, bring this up. So the youtube.com/Eric Bobrow will bring you here. They also have something with user/Eric Bobrow and etc. But youtube.com/Eric Bobrow, and then again archicadtraining.com/sale if you wanted to look at my training. Okay, so let's go on to Heather says, trouble with using hotspots is that if the subject moves, the hotspot doesn't and the dimensions become incorrect. Yeah, so in general, when you dimension things, you want them to refer to the element that is important. So if the element moves or stretches, then the dimension updates. Using hotspots is something that can be useful for laying things out, but hotspots are static in the sense that they don't readjust. Maybe they were originally where certain things aligned, but the stars move in the sky, so to speak. So when you are dimensioning, just a general tip here is you're going to go to the dimension tool. You're going to then hover over an element, and I'll just say, if I hover over this corner of this slab, you can see it highlights that slab. So if I click on it, I know that that dimension is going to be locked in to that slab. And if that slab moves or gets wider or narrower, then that dimension will change. So obviously this is going to be the width of this particular front steps there. Now when we get to a corner like this, you can see that it's highlighting one wall. Let me just move away and do it again. It's going to be highlighting one wall. If I say, no, that's not the one I want, I can use the tab key. It's interesting. They've, with these guides coming in, hitting the tab didn't cycle instantly between elements. So if I'm going on this and I hover over this and I hit tab and tab again, you can see how it's tabbing or showing me different elements that I could be locking into. So every time I hit tab, it's cycling through that. But apparently I have to do this before it reaches the point of getting a guideline and then having the coordinates be highlighted. For a moment there, we had the tracker, and it was, when I hit tab, it was just cycling through the X and Y and different coordinate values. In any event, this is now locked in here. Let's just say that I take it to that point there, double click, and we can dimension in whatever orientation might make sense. And then what you definitely want to know is that if we move this down, let's say 2 feet here, that the dimension updates with it. Or if I stretch or change that edge here, 2 feet, that this, in this case, this point will move, but of course not the other point there. Okay, so let's see. So I'm taking lots of questions as they come in on the fly. I hope you're finding this useful. Let me now switch gears and talk about some of the concepts that I think are so helpful to understand for newer users particularly, but for all users. So one thing that people get confused about is the difference between the project map and the view map. And let's just take a look at this. So in the navigator, we have the project map, the view map, the layout book, and the publisher. And then of course we have some controls from the project chooser menu that you can pull up. But in terms of a list of parts of the project here, the project map are generic locations. So the stories, horizontal planes, the sections, vertical planes, typically cutting through the building, elevations, vertical planes that are usually from outside of the building. Interior elevations, similar, but within rooms, bounded areas, worksheets and details, 2D working areas for slightly different purposes, and 3D documents, which are less frequently used for creating views in 3D, but annotating them as a document, as a drawing, and saved 3D views. And of course, there's more things here that I don't want to just try to explain everything from the beginning. Let's look though at the difference between the stories and the part of the view map that would be plans. Because this is probably the simplest thing to recognize, is that when we're working in an architectural context, we have a floor plan and we have other variations of the same plan, such as the lighting and ceiling plan or reflected ceiling plan. And we may have, in some cases, an electrical plan that's distinct that shows the electrical and power plans. So all of these are variations. They're all on the same story. So if I go to the project map, we have remained on the first floor, which for those of you outside the US, that's the ground floor for you. In the US version, it is number 1, or the first floor is typically the one that you enter the building on. All right, so all of these are the same project map viewpoint, but they were all different views within that. And what is the difference between this? Well, between these three, it is the settings that say we are on that source viewpoint, but we have various settings that create a specific type of view. Most immediate one to be focused on would be the layer combination, which determines what we see. Are we seeing electrical elements or not? Are we seeing furniture? Are we seeing trees? Are we seeing interior partitions, etc.? So these are all part of what defines a view. Now, where I see people get confused is that they ask me often, when you're working in ARCHICAD or when you're working in early design or when you're working at any point, do you use the project map or do you use the view map? And the answer is you use both, but I would say stay in the view map most of the time, because when you're working on the electrical plan, you should activate the electrical plan view and draw things on the right layers to show up on the drawing that is going to be the electrical plan. If I open up the layer settings here, so if I click on this icon for the layer settings down in the bottom center of the screen, we'll see that the layer combination we have active is called ConDoc, or Construction Documents for Electrical, and it has certain layers on and certain layers hidden. And of course, we're going to see down here the electrical layers are turned on, as well as things, like walls that are shown on many, many layers. So this is built into that view, and we should be drawing anything that goes on the electrical plan on layers that are visible here. If we have, if we're in the first floor plan, we're not seeing some of those elements. And if I go and try to place an outlet, receptacle, or light fixture or something like that, you'll get a message saying that it is that layer is turned off. Now, what I've seen people do often is to say, oh, well, I want to place this, let me just turn that layer on. So they'll go into the layer dialog and they'll say, oh, I need to put something on the electrical layer, so I'll just turn that layer on and unlock it here, and there's some 3D lights that I want to put on. So they'll just manually change that and say okay, which means that you will start to see these elements, but then you go off and do something else and you come back and these elements are no longer visible, and these newer users tend to go, I don't know, I drew something, but I can't find it. I don't know what layer I put it on. So in general, what you want to do is pay attention to the layers. And for example, the layers here for the electrical 3D lights, when I click in this, we'll see that certain layer combinations, it's visible, and certain ones they're not. So for example, the electrical 3D ones are shown actually in elevations, because you might have some light fixtures, wall fixtures, etc., that would be seen on elevations. And of course, you're going to see them on the electrical plan here, and you might see them in the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, MEP systems, and the reflected ceiling. This is a common thing to show. So these are going to be seen in certain plans, but not in the floor plan here. So as a newer user, if you've ever said, I don't know where I put it, the best tip that I can give you is, when you're placing things, be in using a layer combination that matches your intended drawing or intended output, and then make sure that you're placing the elements on the layer that makes sense for your purpose, rather than just sort of saying, I'll put it on the ARCHICAD layer. By the way, the ARCHICAD layer up here is visible in all layer combinations. That's one of its unique features, is that you can't hide it. It's always visible and unlocked there. So pay attention to layers, very important. Now, the other place where this trips people up is we're on the first floor plan here, and let's say here's a section. So here's a section through the building, and I right click on this and I say open with current view settings. Or I'll get a similar result if I'm in the plan, I'm sorry, if I was in the plan and I double clicked on this CD03 section C in the project map. Now what's wrong with this picture? Well, the roofs are not visible. There's probably some other layers that are also hidden because they were hidden on the floor plan. So how do we get a result that looks right? Well, instead of going here and then going, I have to open up the layers and turn on the roofs. Okay, let's turn these on here. All right, well, that's going to help some, but it's still probably not got all the layers that you want for that section. Let me go to the view map, and instead of going to that section from by right-clicking on the section marker and saying open with current settings, I go to, let's see, we are in section C. I go to the view that's set up in my sections folder in the view map and double click, and we'll see now that it now looks a little bit different. It's actually, even in this case for construction document purposes, it's not got the shading. It's just got line work there. And it probably also has some other layers, like the terrain was added, that layer. So you want to use the view map to navigate around so that you have a predictable destination to work on a drawing or work on your model with certain things showing and certain things not. Now there is an interesting trick. I'm going to just double check it because I actually haven't used this in a while. So if I have this section selected and I say open with current view settings, we're going to have that same issue that we had a minute ago. You can see that. But let's just see if I have this selected and I right click on it. There's now an option that says views from this section here. So here's C section. Let's try that. Okay, and you can see that it's the correct view from it. So instead of saying open that section with the current settings, which means the layers that are on in the floor plan in this case, we can say I want to see the view. Now I think it was probably the last view that I opened here. In other words, this when I right click on this, views from this section, but I can say give me all related views, and that's going to be a quick way to see. Of course, this is the one that was highlighted here. There are some other ones that are highlighted, and if I scroll down, you can see here, for example, is a presentation section. So this is a quick way to jump to, oh yeah, I'd like to see a section, but I'd like to see it with the shading, and so now that's going to come up with a slightly different style of view with colors in this case. So that's an important thing, is to use the view map when you're navigating around, and use also the view map when you're placing drawings onto layout sheets. So when you create a layout sheet and you place the drawing, you're going to place a view rather than a viewpoint, because the view will define more precisely what is on the drawing. So let's just see if there are any questions related to what I've done. I'm sure all of you who are veterans are going, oh yeah, I know this. Sometimes it's good just to have a reminder, and in fact that option to select the section marker and pick a view is a very cool thing that was added in recent versions. It's not something that used to be available. It does save time. You don't even have to go to the view map. You can just say I want a good view of this, that this marker is connected to. All right, so Tom says, type Q to have the blue guidelines or circles show up instantly. They appear after the prescribed time in the profile manager otherwise. Okay, so that's a good little tip here. So if I'm drawing, I'll just go to the line tool here, and if I hover over this wall, after about 2 or 3 seconds, couple of seconds, we got that little blue highlight. If I go to the corner, after a second and a half, it brings up that snap point, and now actually I have the ability to snap in relationship to that. Now if you want to do it more quickly, as Tom pointed out, if I'm just going to bring this over and hit Q immediately, Q, and you can see that it instantly shows that snap point, as well as in this case, the distance between the two most recent snap points and the arc, which would allow me to, potentially draw something an equivalent distance away. So Q will turn those guides on and off, or instantly turn them on. Okay, so Andy says, can't see the right Slack channel the user group is in. Okay, and then I see he just joined in. So you wrote it at 1:36. Okay, in the coaching calls channel. So for those of you who are in Slack here, it hasn't been a lot of activity today for this session, but there, Andy, you're here. Okay, so, but I am getting some nice comments from the GoToWebinar chat panel, and I can see both of them, but only the Slack one can I show on screen. So you're seeing, a little bit of discussion here, not too much. We often have some, very extensive things where people are sharing their questions and comments and things like that. So I found Slack to be a very great way to build community and communicate more easily. Okay. Okay, Kelly Morgan, I'm a commercial architect beginner at ARCHICAD and was wondering how to create a 2x2 acoustical lay-in ceiling tile for a ceiling. Okay, well, let's just do something here, Kelly. I'm always happy to help take specific questions, particularly when, I can demonstrate some things relatively quickly. All right, so if we have I'll just create a bounded area. So we're going to take the wall tool, and right now I've got some generic walls. I'm just going to draw a box like this. Okay, so here we have a box. Now, if I go to the slab tool, the slab tool can be set to whatever. Right now it's set to be, its top surface is at 0, so it would be a floor, and it has a certain thickness. Let's just put in a floor here. And now let's just take a look at this in 3D. Now, of course, this is very boring. It's just going to be a rectangle. Here we have, now what if we wanted to put in a 2x2 ceiling? Now I'll go back to the floor plan. And so first thing I'm going to do is say we could draw in a ceiling as just simply a slab, and then get line work for that ceiling that represents the 2x2 pieces. So that is one approach. How would we do that? Well, first of all, we start out with saying, well, the slab is going to be at a different height. So we're going to say, oh, it's up at 9 feet or something like that. And then this is going to be, let's see, we're going to make, in this case, the reference to be the bottom. So I'm going to say the underside here. Now, if you had a more complex form, instead of just a generic piece here, if we had a composite here of some sort, then we would have other reference planes there. But let's just go back to the simple case, because we're going to just have a thin acoustic ceiling grid here. So I'm going to say it's on the underside, and of course I could make it, instead of generic interior, I could, pick something else out of it. I'm not sure. Generally, it could be gypsum board. Could it be, something else? But we'll just leave it as generic interior for now, because I want to show you how you can get some grid lines on there. But we'll say it starts at 9 feet, and let's just say it's one inch thick to make it nominal. Whoops. So this is 9 feet and 1 inch here. There. Okay, so I'm also going to change the layer. So instead of it being a floor, it's going to be a ceiling. Why am I not seeing this here? I was up late last night with some things. So why am I not seeing slab? Oh, here's slab ceiling, right? Okay, so the ceiling layer is turned off. Why? Because we're not in a layer combination that would normally show the ceiling. We're on a floor plan. So I'm going to break my rule here and just say that I'd like to turn on the slab ceiling layer. Or I could switch to a layer combination like this one, preliminary design, which is specifically designed to have lots of layers turned on to do initial design. So if I change to that, we're going to see a whole mess here because it's going to have a lot of the site information. So let's go back to the plan, and actually let's just go to the reflected ceiling plan here. And now we will see that the layer for ceilings, of course, is available. So we'll just go in here and drop this in, and then we'll take the marquee and look at that. So now we have this ceiling piece there. Now the ceiling piece doesn't have any, the 2x2 that you're talking about. There are two ways that you can do this. One is on the plan, one is in 3D, just associated with this element. So if I select this, I can go and tell it to have a, where would it be? On the floor plan, I can say I'd like to have a cover fill. So that means that it's going to have something that represents the surface, and it could be something that is a grid. So here's a 2x2 acoustical vectorial hatching. You can see instantly we have some line work that represents that. Now it's not lined up nicely, so we don't have a whole tile in one corner. So what I can do is I'd like to, instead of having the fill oriented just randomly or to the project origin, I can give it an origin point that I can control. So I click on that, and now you can see that it's starting at this point and moves in, in whatever direction this second point gives it. So this is an option there, and I can move this corner point to a convenient location, and now we have a nice even start, at least in this particular corner. Now, when I go to 3D, if I go to 3D here, we're not going to see any difference because that was just purely a 2D exercise. Now in 3D, of course, now we're looking above here, but I can choose that I'd like to make the surface, instead of by building materials, which was just generic, I can say, let's just take all of these here, and we'll change this to something that might be, do we have a ceiling or grid? Haven't looked at this for a while. I know that we should have some sort of a grid. We have shingles, siding, tile, ceiling, acoustical 2x2. All right. So you can see now this has that line work there. Now the starting point is not in that same location. Why? Because this one, the orientation of the fill was not coordinated. So what we'd want to do is go back to the floor plan and change this, or to the ceiling plan, and change this to say that it should use not just an arbitrary cover fill, but use the fill from the surface here. So now we're saying we're linking it to the one that was in 3D, and we do have the fill origin. Now this fill origin is set at this corner. Now, by the way, in 3D, I'm not sure which corner is which, so I'm just going to put a column here just arbitrarily. Let's just drag this in. I just want to be able to see which is the one that was there. Let's just take it up to 12 feet. So it's going to stick up above the ceiling, and just so that we can see if that's working. So we'll just do this and go to 3D. And yeah, so this is the one there, and you can see that we have, so is that origin point here? So this origin actually is not matching there. So if I say the fill, the surface, oh, I know, because we would need to go and use the document menu, creative imaging, align 3D texture. So this is a command that says, take a surface that might be bricks or blocks or anything, and I'd like to set the origin to it. So I say set the origin, and I can click on this corner, and you can see now the origin point does neatly line up. Now, what are some of the limitations of what I just did in this exercise? Well, one is that although this looks like it has line work, there's no snaps in here. There's also no quantities. It doesn't say how many tiles we have. It is basically just a representation. So for certain purposes, this works great. It's pretty quick, and you can make areas, large areas. It doesn't have to be this little tiny one. So how would you do a more sophisticated version? I'm not going to demonstrate all of this. I'm just going to mention a few ideas. So one idea is that you actually draw these lines with little beams. So the beams can be just purely little tiny rectangles, or they can be a profile shape, the T bar that supports the acoustics. And you can draw one and then multiply it every 2 feet, and fill up the space in each direction. You can also create or place individual squares of just this slab and drag copies or multiply copies to create a whole bunch of little ceiling pieces. There are some objects in the library that are specifically for ceiling diffusers and other things. So instead of just being a generic surface, you would fill up some of them with vents or lights, fluorescence, etc. And then the ultimate extension of that is that there are, I believe there's at least one add-on that you can get for ARCHICAD that will lay out ceiling arrangements. And someone might be able to type into the chat window what that is. I sort of vaguely remember the word EPTAR, but I'm not sure if that's correct, EPTAR. But someone probably on this call may know that. Okay, so grid library object. So that's another thing you can do, grid library object. So what is a grid library object? If we go to the object tool and we just say, hey, I have objects here that are chairs, and I can go, window treatments, and I can go to casework, and all of these things here. Well, you can type in and search for something like grid, and you're going to see come up some grid. So here's the grid object here, and the grid object does allow you to say, hey, I want it to be a certain length. So if I made this 15 feet, it's going to get longer, but it's not going to well, actually it will say how many structural dimensions, number of frames. So it's going to divide the frames evenly in each direction. So if I wanted the A to be like 8, so they're going to be more like squares, almost squares. You type that in, and there is some, you can coordinate frames here. So I guess you can go in here and you can say the distances of these in each direction. So that you can get pretty precise there and have some things even 2 feet and other things, just other distances. But I don't know that you can actually cut out or make it fit around the corners. I don't think you can draw a polygon that would define the extent of it. So it has some limitations. You could cover up what you don't want to see, and you could use a solid element operation to remove what shouldn't be there, but it is sort of a brute force thing, because you can't modify these individual elements as far as I know. Okay, so I see a question from Tom Markunis. Hey, Tom, when should you ever put anything on the ARCHICAD layer? Good question. So I'm going to think about it for a minute and just ask a question for all of you. When have you put things on the ARCHICAD layer, and did it work out well? So you can put things on the ARCHICAD layer temporarily, just because you don't want to think about which layer it should go on, or maybe it's just a temporary drafting aid or something that you just want to look at and then you're going to get rid of. So, let's just drop it in there. I've certainly done that. I put things on the ARCHICAD layer when I'm teaching, just to say, I want to show you something and I don't want to go find the right layer. But ultimately, anything that you want to be able to hide, then you probably want to have it on a layer that you could turn off. Now, there are some elements that you pretty much show on every view, like exterior walls. If we go to the layer settings here, and I go to a wall exterior here, it's on for almost all of these layer combinations. Now, there is one special purpose layer combination for dimensions that are going to be repeated from one story to another, which is primarily used to create a view that you then combine with multiple stories. It's good for buildings with a lot of repetition from story to story, where you want to have one complex set of dimensions that is going to just be shown on several stories, and you don't want to have the walls showing. So while you may say, well, we always show walls in drawings, well, this is a special type of view. When you're working on objects, you may want to turn it off. There are some cases where you just want to hide the walls and look at what's inside the building. So walls would be something that could go on the ARCHICAD layer, but it's nice to be able to turn them off. What is on the ARCHICAD layer in general? Almost nothing that remains. Sometimes you can put notes just so that they're there, but generally, if you have them on the ARCHICAD layer, they're going to be seen in every view. So you have to be aware of that. So let's see some comments. Francisco says, I put things there when I need something just as a reference for some time. And so when I change layer combinations, they don't disappear. You can also do that just as a temporary way station. Hey, something is on the wrong layer. I want to switch it to another layer, but that other layer is currently turned off. So you switch one or more elements to the ARCHICAD layer, then you switch your layer combination. Now that other layer is visible, and you then select the elements and switch to the new one. Okay. And he says use ARCHICAD layer for temporary placement until allocated to the correct layer. Absolutely. Tom says when importing an element with missing layers, those layers can be set to the ARCHICAD layer and then move to the new layer. That's a good point. So when you are bringing in elements from another project or from a consultant or something like that, it is possible that you have layers that don't exist in your project. Generally, ARCHICAD will add those layers to your environment. The danger, if you indiscriminately add things, is that now your layer combinations may not be set up correctly for the new layers. So in general, you want to move the stuff that was on these extraneous layers to the correct layer, or possibly move them all to the ARCHICAD layer, get rid of the junk layers, and then just grab, all of these furniture, we're going to put them on the furniture layer. All of the mechanical equipment, we'll put them on that layer. So you can have them on the ARCHICAD layer temporarily. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, a lot of comments and questions. Good. So we're getting some good interaction here. All right, so Zakaria says, I want support in making a ramp from the ground floor to the basement. Okay, that we'll see. I don't think I have time to demonstrate that. Let me just tell you conceptually that you can draw a just a roof. So a roof, can be used for a ramp. Now, roof has a limitation that it will, if you're doing a curved ramp, it's not going to work so well because it'll go up just on one plane. You can use the stair tool with a, and I believe there's even a favorite in at least the US library for a ramp. And instead of having steps, you'd say take off the steps and let's just have the supporting what you would normally have as a beam, one or more beams that support the stair, and you make that beam the shape of your that you want the ramp, and then that you can possibly make it curved or do whatever you like, and it will, if you have the profile be the actual ramp shape, then it will work nicely for that. So I don't know if you can understand that, but those are a couple of ideas there. There is also I believe, some library parts. If we just go in here, and this is always a good thing to do, is say, hey, I wonder if Graphisoft has, in their infinite wisdom, created something called ramp, and you can see here is curved ramp and straight ramp. So you can then go say, here's a curved ramp, and there's various parameters for how wide it is, and whether it has, some various pieces in it, flanges, etc. So that's certainly the simplest thing if it meets your needs here. Okay. So ceiling editor, US or international. So going back to that ceiling topic, so ceiling editor. So I'm not sure, Tom, can you just tell me where one finds that? Is that in the standard library? I'm not quite sure. Or is it a goodie? So, all right. So Lawrence from down under in Queensland says he loves my work. Thank you. Okay. So he writes, I have my navigator keyboard shortcuts as Q. So that brings up the navigator and option Q for the expanded navigator dialog box. What's the name of the command that you showed using the Q key so I can have a look at its function? All right, so when you have keyboard shortcuts and you're saying, I want to control it, I want to be able to see what's available. He's saying there's a Q here. I didn't even know that it was, I had grab that and it has another function. Let's go to the option menu, work environment. In the work environment, we can change our preferences for the way ARCHICAD works with us. One part is keyboard shortcuts. So if I go to keyboard shortcuts here, and we open this up, and we go to, let's say, edit menu, and we do undo, you'll see Command Z, or it would be Control Z or Z, where if you're on Windows, and here's cut, etc. So these are the ones that are common, of course. Now, if I do a search here, if I do Q, I'm not sure whether that actually does this, render, show hide, quick options. So obviously these have the word quick, so that's Q here. So not seeing any of these have keyboard shortcuts. So this is only searching for a letter within the name of the command. But if we were to say, well, I recall this had something to do with guides, right? So show hide guidelines. There's L, so you can actually hit L and that'll turn it on or off. Input constraint snap guides here. Okay, so there are other ones. Now let's see, snap. So surface snap, snap guides. Okay, I'm not sure, set snap point values, so these are not there. So tell you what I can do here is, I don't quite know, I could look around and maybe find it, but there is this really cool thing. You can show the shortcut list in a browser. So when I click on that, what that's going to do is it's going to switch over to my browser and instantly bring up a list of all the shortcut keys currently defined in my work environment. So if you've customized some of these things, you will see them show up. And now if I scroll through it, and look for this, I might be able to find that. And then here's a shortcut. Just when you're in a web window, you can do Command F or Control F here. So this is allowing me to say Q. It says there are 8 instances of the letter Q in this particular browser window. And this one says quit. Okay, well, I'll say, and that's Command Q or Control Q. And that quits the application. We'll go to the next one here. Cursor snap variance. Shift Q, that's a little up arrow Q. Now maybe let me just zoom this up a little bit so you can see it better. So cursor snap variance Q switches among these. Let's go to another one. Q, force snap reference. So there was the command that we were using with the letter Q. It displays the next guideline group or edge LARC extension guideline without waiting for the user set lag time to expire. So there you go. That's what it was. You can change that. So if we go, since it's force snap reference, so if I go back to ARCHICAD and I go force, oh, it's not in the current menu structure, so I can't find it. But if I do all commands in alphabetical order, here's force snap reference, and here's the Q. So that's the other trick, is that some commands are not in the menus. Particularly keystroke commands that, why would you want to go up to the menu to pick this when you really just want to have something happen on screen? So it's not in the menu, but you can say, I want to search or find something in the all commands list. So if I turn this off here, we can see now these are force user to leave project, go away. All right. Anyway, so you can see here, and if we wanted to have a different one, I can just do, like, for example, I can hit multiple keys. So I'll do 3 keys here with the Q. So I can have, multiple keys and assign it, and it will use both now for the time being. And then of course I could say detach this, and now that this is what I would use, and the Q would not be in use. Let me just put the Q back on there. And detach the other one that I just did. By the way, this will all be retained for your work environment. After I click OK, it would have any changes there. If you want to put it onto another computer like your laptop or home and work, you can export your keyboard shortcuts and import them. Or you can, if you wanted to have everybody in the office have the same shortcuts, you could do it that way. All right. So Heather says north arrow. I think maybe, Heather, you're referring to what would you put on the ARCHICAD layer? Okay. If you want to have the north arrow show on every single drawing and never be able to hide it, great. That's something, of course. And Tom says on layouts when typing directly on a layout. So yeah, in a layout, if you think about it, for the most part, whatever you put on a layout, you want to show all the time. So in general, actually, when you put drawings on a layout, each element, whether it's a drawing or some annotation or even parts of the title block, they do have layers. And in general, we would say put everything on the ARCHICAD layer, because when you open up a layout sheet, you just want to have it all there and print it. But you might want to put some things like your stamp. So you have an official stamp that says, I approve this drawing, or I'm putting my name, my professional reputation behind this drawing that's being issued. Well, you don't want to put that on when you're in preliminary. You want to only put it on when you're submitting. So that would go on a layer that goes off or on. But the rest of the drawings and annotation maybe does go on the ARCHICAD layer. So that's probably the major exception, that I would say most things in the layout book should go on the ARCHICAD layer. Okay, so and Steve Pribble also says putting the north arrow on the ARCHICAD layer. Yeah, okay, the layer showing all the time. All right, so Dwight Lander says, we use a horizontal curtain wall for ceiling tiles. Not sure if I covered this already as I had to step away. Yeah, that is actually can be a good way to go about it. So very briefly, since I don't have time to demonstrate everything, there is the curtain wall tool here. The curtain wall tool does allow you to create schemes that have certain spacing. So here is a typical vertical curtain wall there, but you can make it 2 by 2, instead of 2 by 4, and you can make them all the same type here. So imagine that you have that whatever shape you need it to be, and then you can define the frames in between, what shape they are. There's some, different options for this. And then the panels, one of the nice things about doing it with a curtain wall is that, of course, much of your ceiling will be just filled in panels, but some pieces of the ceiling will have lights, will have diffusers, etc. And so you can select them individually and swap them out. So it can work well. You're going to just, when you define the curtain wall, you're going to define it in a horizontal orientation in that case. I'm not going to go into demonstrating that whole process, but you can do it. And the outline of the curtain wall can be any arbitrary polygon, so it can easily fit into the ceiling of any space. The one drawback I've heard, and I don't know if it's still an issue, is that it can slow down things. In other words, the curtain wall tool is got a lot of options, creates detailed geometry or shapes or forms in your model. And I've heard if you had a very large project that it can slow things down. Now, maybe you manage that just by only having that layer on when you need to see the ceiling tiles. There may be some other options that control it. And of course, that comment about it slowing things down may be out of date. Maybe Graphisoft's made it more efficient and current computers can handle it better. So, but yeah, curtain wall could be a very good option. I'd forgotten about that. Thank you for reminding me, Dwight. Okay, Maria says the north symbol is normally always visible. Okay, then put your north symbol on the arrow on the ARCHICAD layer. Doug says, can you set the layer for an element so that when you pick the command, it automatically goes to that layer? Okay, so here's a beginner question. When I go to the wall tool, what layer is it on? It's on the last layer that the wall tool was set, a wall exterior. When I go to the column tool, it goes to the layer that was set, because each one of these tools remembers the default settings of that tool. The default meaning the last settings that were put in place to draw new elements. Now, after you've drawn something, you can select it and you can change its layer easily. And one of the things that you can do is you can eyedrop. So this is something that certainly everybody should learn very early on in their experience with ARCHICAD. If I go to the eyedropper tool here and then hover over an element, you see here it says this is a slab, this is the ceiling slab. When I eyedrop it, now I'm set to draw slabs that are on that ceiling layer with the particular settings that I had, the sizes, etc. Now, is there a floor somewhere on here? Let's just go to the first, let's see, just trying to think. If we go to the first floor plan, I'm not sure whether the floor layer actually is visible. Do we have a floor? Yeah, we do. Oh, that's a slab. So if I eyedrop this with the keyboard shortcut, now the slab is set to be on the structural floor layer. So when you are switching between tools, it will automatically remember the layer that it was last used on. But of course, some tools are used on multiple layers. In fact, in general, that's a common thing. Slabs can be used for floors or ceilings and tabletops sometimes. Objects, of course, are used on all different types of layers, furniture and landscape and equipment, etc. So while you can't just switch a tool, if you want to make sure you're on the right layer, then eyedropping an element that already exists on that layer is the ideal, or using favorites. So favorites is another way that you can do that. So if I go to the wall tool here and I go to this little triangle, these are the favorites. Now in this particular file, I don't have any favorites set up because this is a sample project for master template 23 that we haven't finished putting in all the favorites. There's a lot of work because there's a lot of favorites that will go in. But in general, favorites are going to be a great way to do that. All right. So Marek Krukowski says, some worksheets like legends. So I'm not quite sure. I think you may be referring to the ARCHICAD layer. So talking not generically, but just sort of generally, a worksheet is a 2D working area that you can draw things that you need. You can bring in PDFs or DWG files, etc. Worksheets and details often are used only in a single context. In other words, you create a legend that you're going to, work with, and when you bring up that worksheet, you want everything to be seen. You don't need to necessarily turn on and off some of the things in it. Same thing for a detail drawing. It's frequently the case that when you create a detail, everything that you draw should be seen when you place it on the sheet, and you never want to turn off any of the things because you'd have an incomplete detail. So you could put everything in that context on the ARCHICAD layer, but you lose some flexibility if you wanted to, for example, work on a detail and turn off the text, because you just want to work on the geometry. Yeah, so a worksheet with a legend, simple cases like that. Okay. Maria says ARCHICAD layer is also used to copy paste between files to avoid importing the new layer. That's a good workflow suggestion. I mentioned earlier how if you bring something in from another file and it's on a layer that's that's not part of your working environment, that you may then have this extra layer to deal with. One way to avoid that is to, before you copy it from the other file, is put the elements onto the ARCHICAD layer. Now here's a little tip, a little trick. I'll just say, if I wanted to put a bunch of elements, like all of these elements, so I used an arrow tool and I selected a bunch of elements that crossed the area that I was drawing. So we now have 31 elements selected. You can see the little number up here. Now you can see that this has hotspot as highlighted, and the hotspot is on the ARCHICAD layer. Now if I change this, I'll just put it on special temporary hide. Okay, this is a layer that's in master template. It's always unlocked, and we can put things on it to just make sure they're hidden temporarily for maybe presentation or study purposes. I'll do that. Now, the hotspot disappeared from down here. Now there's 30 selected. I'll undo that, and you'll see that that hotspot was down here. So this changing it here did not affect all the other elements. If I want to affect all the other elements, I need to use the edit selection set. Here's the little icon for it. You can also get access to it from under the edit menu, element settings, edit selection set, and there is a keyboard shortcut. So if you, whatever way you do it, it'll say, I have a bunch of elements selected, 8 walls, 2 stairs, etc. And all of these elements could be changed to a different layer, possibly could be made to a different color. Let me just make them a different color. I'll just, I'll just make them this color red and say okay. And if I deselect, you can see all of those became red in here. Now let me just undo that, and we'll go into the edit selection set, and I can say I'd like to put them onto the ARCHICAD layer, or since that's not going to be, I won't see a difference, let me just say put them on the hide layer so they'll all temporarily disappear. I'll say okay. and you see they all disappear. So if you did want to put everything, that you're copying onto the ARCHICAD layer to avoid those issues, use the edit selection set, because it will modify the settings of elements of different types. Otherwise, when you have multiple elements selected, one tool will be shown here, and if you change the layer, it'll only affect elements of this type, in this case, sections. We've got a couple of section markers there. Okay. Tom Palmer says, ARCHICAD 23 can have transitions in ramps as well. So I'm not quite sure what you mean. Can you explain transitions in ramps? And it says that the ceiling grid tool available to subscription users in the USA is one option. So ceiling grid tool. Okay, so that's interesting. I am a subscriber. I do pay my dues just like all of you. I used to be a reseller for 20 years, but the last 10 years I've been a consultant and buying my license and buying my subscription. So let me bring up this here. So if I go to what is the subscription thing? I'm going to go to ARCHIPLUS. I don't know if that's actually the address. No, it's not. Interesting. Domain name is for sale. In the US, the subscription program, as I recall, is called ARCHIPLUS, but let's just say Graphisoft ARCHIPLUS. Here, will that take me? archiplus.graphosoftus.com. All right, so and here's member content. So I'll see if I can log in. I think that I have this password saved here. I don't know if that. I'm not sure what your password is. I know that they did change it there, so I'm not quite sure what it what it is now. But I guess in member content, so I'd have to track that down. Member content, they would have a ceiling grid tool. Okay. And there's also, interesting, well, what is this? BIM components. So Tom, you're a wealth of information. Thank you so much. BIMcomponents.com. All right, so BIMcomponents.com is an interesting portal. So it looks like it's highlighting ARCHICAD. Here, I believe that they do have things in a variety of formats, including, of course, ARCHICAD. But there's GSM details. So we'll just do /GSM. So GSM would be the Graphisoft format for library parts. And then it looks like you had it all capitalized. So that might be important. Did I do 14843? Okay, ceiling editor, int. Okay, so 3D view. Now, I'm not seeing a whole lot of detail on the ceiling, so I'm not sure. Parametric suspended ceiling object for design with editable panels and accessories. Someone says that they didn't like it. It didn't work very well, I guess. 12 comments. Tutorial video clip. All right. Anyway, so there's some useful things. Okay, another point from Lawrence. Good point in terms of the keyboard shortcuts. Let's go back in here. So if you wanted to track down just, what keyboard, you heard about a keyboard shortcut. Here's the keyboard shortcuts. And you wanted to know what is using it. Then if I go here and I say, well, here's the about one, and I just type in, let's say, a letter Q, saying I'd like to assign it, it'll tell you what it's assigned to. So that was certainly the quickest way to say, well, what was that command? You're using this Q. Well, it's this one. All right. So I'm not going to take over that for about ARCHICAD, but it quickly allows you to see that. Great. Okay. So Lawrence says, please remind users that after redefining a shortcut key or any other setting in the work environment, the scheme needs to be redefined, or any and all changes will be lost on exiting ARCHICAD. Very sad after you've made a lot of custom changes and forget to do this. Okay, good point. Options, work environment, so we're keyboard shortcuts. All right, so we go on and do something like one of my favorite ones in the edit menu is reshape, intersect. So intersect, you have two walls that are not quite meeting and you want them to intersect together. I like having an eye. Actually, would you look at that? It's no longer assigned to anything. I think it used to be something in teamwork, but I'll just say I. All right, so now if I actually, oh, you know what? It's not I don't want I want Command I. Yeah, all right, so Command I will work. I don't want to just type I, although maybe that would work too. Command I. All right, so that allows me to do that. Now here, if I say OK, what Lawrence is saying is that you could spend quite a while getting everything perfect and then leave and come back in and it'll be gone. Now, I don't think that it will disappear just because you quit ARCHICAD, but it will disappear if you reset your work environment. Because right now we are in a custom setting, and I think you can continue to work with that custom one, but ultimately, if you want to save it, if you want to know that your work is saved, you want to store this, and I'll just give Lawrence the honor here. So we'll call this Lawrence. So now I can go back and forth if I want to use the standard one or use the Lawrence one, which has, in this case, one additional enhancement. So having done that, this is now available anytime I start up ARCHICAD, and would be the default if it's what I was last using when I quit out of ARCHICAD. So one place where you could lose it, you might have a custom environment and have more than one ARCHICAD open, and maybe you've customized it in one and not the other. And then you quit out of one, it's still active, but when you quit out of the other, it gets overridden. So that's gonna protect you there. All right. So Andrew says searching or filtering for a command in keyboard shortcuts is a new feature in 23 that makes Windows users happy, while Mac users can do it by using the help menu for a long time. Okay, that's interesting. So I know that there are some changes that I don't even get to pay attention to. So here's search. So if I did intersect. All right. So I'm in the help menu in ARCHICAD. I'm typing in intersect, and you can see here are some menu commands that this is very cool. So you can see that, and if you click on it, it'll actually do that command. But this way you can say, I know there's a command, let's say edit selection. All right, so I type that in, and element settings edit selection set, which is gray right now because I have nothing selected, but it is showing me where that is. So even if I just said edit, you can see that there are only about 10 particular ones that are available there. So if you just remember part of it, you can do that. And I guess that is now available for Windows users. So, all right, so Buzz, thank you for your blessings. All right, and Chris gives me the password for the member content here. Let me just see if that works. I'm not going to share it on screen because, if you're not an ARCHIPLUS member, you shouldn't know that. But I thought that they gave me a different password than that one recently. But let's see, ARCHIPLUS Graphisoft US. We'll just see if I can get in there. So here's ARCHIPLUS Graphisoft US member content. And let's just see if it is. Bingo. Yep. All right. Well, update that. Okay. So anyway, so there are tips and help guides and various things. And down here we have the ceiling grid tool. Okay. So definitely worth checking out this page if you are a subscription member in the US, and I suppose there are probably some similar things in other countries. All right, Thank you. Okay, so let us go to, let's see. Whoops. Here. Miguel says, I use ARCHICAD layer either as a temporary for stuff I don't want ever to be hidden, and recommend the team to use ARCHICAD layer for drawings and or notes on the layouts, also for many details or worksheets. So, okay, your comments definitely are in line with what I was suggesting. Okay, so see, we are a little bit after 90 minutes, so we have I allocated a couple hours, so we can go a little bit longer. And let me just see what else I want to bring in. I had some very rudimentary notes here. So we talked about the view map and layers. Okay, so we talked a little bit about guidelines here. I think that some of this is worth just spending a few minutes on because it can make a difference for users in terms of avoiding issues. Okay, so we will go back in here. So the topic right now for the next few minutes is how to place and draw elements cleanly and accurately. What are some of the tips that I recommend that you pay close attention to? So if I draw a wall like this, let's just draw a single wall. There is that little blue dashed line that is the guideline. When I bring my cursor up to it, you can see that it becomes a black pencil. So I'm now locked on a known angle. In this case, the known angle is 0 because I'm moving horizontally, and we will have other snaps perhaps at 45 or at 90. And these are, you can set your preferences because maybe you prefer to have them every 15 degrees and have 15, 30, 45, etc. Or maybe you prefer not to have the 45s because most of the stuff you do is not on 45s. So you can control that. Now, as I'm doing this, first of all, I want to make sure that I have a guideline most of the time to draw on the axis. Or if guides are turned off, and let's just force it to be turned off. So I'll go to my work environment. Let's see, input constraints and guides. So we turn off these guides here just temporarily. And now, as I draw this, there is no snapping. It's not snapping to it. Now, if I need to snap, I can press the Shift key. Actually, no, the Shift key is not even working when I turn that off. Okay, all right, so let's see. We'll go back to the work environment and input constraints. All right, so we're going to put this back on here, but I think maybe if I turn off, is it guidelines here? No, we still have it there. Turn off. There we go. Okay, so these are some special snaps. So I can have guidelines showing, but the special snaps, you can see that it's not snapping. So if I press the Shift key, because my input constraints are on, I can lock this on an angle. But in general, what you want to do is, unless it's a rare case where something is exactly 2 degrees off or some particular offset, you want to make sure that it is on the axis here on the guideline. Now, second thing is that the distance, if you say, hey, I want this to be a certain length, like 8 feet, I've seen people go, oh, I moved it and it's hard to get it to be exactly 8 feet. Or they might say I've zoomed in on it and I'll get it to be, till it reads exactly 8 feet something. And even then, when you zoom in, you may find that it's hard to get it exactly at that number. And so this distance may be off by some fraction. So that's off by 1/6 of an inch, so about 4 millimeters. Obviously not very much in terms of construction practice, but these sort of errors can multiply as you are working. Now it gets worse if you have changed your project preferences for working units down from 64th here to something, let's say 1/8 inch here, so that would be about 3 millimeters. Now, if I'm drawing this wall, it may say I'm at 2 feet. So it says 2 feet. I got something exactly right. Look at that. All right, well, let's actually measure it. So if I measure from here to here, okay, it says 2 feet. But now let's switch our working units to go down to a very tiny amount. 64th of an inch would be like about between 1/2 and 1/3 of a millimeter. So a very tiny amount. Now, if I measure this from here to here, it's 2 feet and 1/64. So it's just a hair off. Now, why is that important? Depending upon the level of accuracy that you're rounding to, you can end up with dimensions that are supposed to be equal that aren't. You can end up with dimension strings that don't add up. You can also end up with things that don't snap and line up cleanly to each other. So if I wanted to make this the worst case or the most extreme scenario here, let's just put the working units down to inches and no fractions. Now, this isn't forcing my cursor to the nearest inch, it's just forcing my readout to the nearest inch. So if I now go and do this, it's so easy to go 2'2", 2'1", 2 foot here. But how far off is it? Well, it's somewhere, let's say, within 1/2 an inch. Okay. So the working units here, in general, I recommend that you take them as deep as you're able to tolerate. So 64th is the default, and it means that you're going to be able to see if you're on. If I measure this again, how long is this? 2 foot and 19/64. So that's over 1/4 of an inch. That would be over 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters off from that, and that could be significant because I've rounded it. Now, if you wanted to dimension, saying, well, the carpenters or the builders are going to laugh at me if I dimension this wall to the 1/16 of an inch or something like that, then you can set your dimension. So let's say I'm dimensioning from here to here. So there's 2 foot. It's rounding it to the 1/4 in this case. Well, you can set your dimension preferences. Right now, I've set it up in my ARCHICAD master template construction documents to the nearest 1/8 inch because that seems a reasonable one for plan and elevation drawings. But of course, for millwork, we might want to have it much lower. And if you're working in millimeters, you're going to have all different things. If we go to US Builder, here's 1/16. So you can round these to whatever is you desire in here. So if I switch right now to the US ARCHICAD users, this is going to show me exact measurements. Say OK, and you can see that it actually moved the dimension over because it couldn't fit it into that tiny little space there. So when is this important? As I said, when you want dimension strings to add up properly, then it's important that you draw properly. Sometimes you have very tight tolerances for tiles or other things like that, and so having errors compound can be an issue. Well, how can you get things to be perfect? So that you don't have to worry about that. Well, the answer is you either use grid snaps or you type in values. So I'm going to go to the wall tool and I'm just going to draw this wall and I just type in. So I'll say 3 feet or 1.0 meters or 1,000 millimeters, whatever we want, and then I hit enter. All right, now that is exactly, if I were to measure it with the M tool, that's going to be exactly 3 feet. And if I do a dimension, it's going to be exactly 3 feet. So anytime that you're drawing, snap to the axis if it's appropriate, which it is, I'll just say 99% of the time, and type in a value if you know what it should be. Now the question comes up, well, I'm drawing just sort of a concept. I don't want to have to worry about, is it 21 feet or 21 feet 2 inches or whatever. I don't want to have to type it in. Well, here's a nice little trick. So I'll go in, actually here's this space here. Now remember, we had this space. I'll put it on the ceiling plan so we can see the grid of this. All right, so suppose we wanted this to be a nice even space. So in other words, these are 2 foot increments and we wanted to take that out. Now, of course, there could be different constraints. Maybe we'll take it down, so we'll take it in to here. So how do we do that? Because this is just an arbitrary distance. If I measure, you know, from here to here, it's 12 feet 1 and 51/64. I just drew that arbitrarily, right? And the interior dimension would be similar. So what I can do is I can use the marquee tool and enclose this area. Now, when the marquee tool is heavy, it will affect multiple stories. So you can actually literally make the entire building narrower or wider. If you have it in a single, the thin marquee, it'll only affect the current story. And in general, it'll only affect the things that are on visible layers. So if you have layers that are hidden, they won't be affected. But I can go and click on a point like this and bring this in. Now I'm just going to do it approximately to that, that line. And you can see that I clicked on one point, clicked on another, and everything within the marquee moved or stretched. In this case, the you know, the horizontal walls just got shorter here. Now this isn't exactly perfect because I didn't have a snap point. So let's just see how I would get it to be exactly perfect. I take this point here and I bring it all the way to here and read off what the number is. And it says it's 10 feet 9 and 51/64. So I might say, hey, all I need to do is move it 9 and 51/64, and then it'll be exactly 10 feet. But you know what? Even typing that hurts my head. So I'd rather just say 10 and then do a minus to say I'd like to subtract 10 foot 0 minus. So that says go in that direction, but go back 10 feet, go back a certain distance. So you put in the distance, in this case 10 foot 0, and then a minus. And if it was in metric, you could say 3.5 for meters, 3.5 minus. And now it's moved exactly that distance. And I hit enter. And we now have a very precise distance. So anytime you want to do this, let's just say that I wanted to make this upper part. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'll say take this point down to here. And then it says 9 foot 7. So I need to move it back, you know, make it go up further. So I'll just do the 10 foot 0 and then a minus. And you can see it's gone up a little bit. So it's gone a few inches the other direction. I hit enter. And now I have a nice even space. So the marquee is a great way to be able to adjust multiple elements at the same time. We have the wall, this wall moved, these two walls stretched, this slab that is the ceiling, its edge extended, meaning these two node points that are corner points extended, and of course things that were outside of it in general didn't get affected. So in general, if you want to make something clean and have the freedom of sketching, first of all, sketch on the axis or use the guidelines to make sure that things are square. Secondly, if you don't want to type in a distance at the beginning or while you're just doing a concept design, go back in and pull and grab parts of this as you need to. If I wanted to do something inside, now this is a very tiny little space, but let me just go and say I'm going to go draw couple of walls in here. So let's say that I wanted this face of this wall to go down to that point. Well, I can go and use the marquee around this area here and then take this point. Now I could take it, if I had something to snap to, I could snap to that. But in this case, I know it's going to be 6 feet below this point here. So I just reference this point, then type in 6-0 and another dash or minus. And that's now made this piece the right size. And I can go in and do the marquee here. So the marquee, when I draw it this way, the things that are totally enclosed, like this vertical wall, move. The things that are partially enclosed will stretch. Things that are not, where the endpoints are not enclosed, won't be affected. So now I can take either this point or down that point, either one, and say I'd like to take this, say 6 minus. Now you can, instead of doing 6-0 minus, you can just do 6-, and that will also work there. So now I have this particular area, a nice nominal measurements there. So let's see if there are any questions or comments here. So I see Chris says, sometimes when I have a stacked wall, I have problems with a door or window cutting through both where they pass through. What's the fix? So I'm not quite sure what you mean by a stacked wall. Or you have two walls side by side, one being a cladding and one being the core, or do you have a lower wall and an upper wall, in which case you probably do want to have the door cut through that. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. So Tom says, can I show my trick for generic cabinets? Okay, sure. And meanwhile, Chris, I invite you to type in a little more explanation of your stacked wall there. So what is a generic cabinet? Well, if I go to the, and I guess this is a good place to finish, we'll just do this one. If I go to the object tool and we go to this and I type in cabinet, all right. Lots of different cabinet types. Here's, sort of a common one. Well, if we were to lay out a kitchen and you knew that you were going to have 6 cabinets in a row, but you hadn't really decided the width of each one and whether it's going to have doors or drawers and that sort of thing. Of course, it takes time to design a kitchen and to pick out all the materials here. So what makes something look like a cabinet? If you wanted to just sort of have a concept sketch, well, we'll have cabinets over in this area. Well, you can represent it using a complex profile. So let me just go and place this element, and then we'll derive a complex profile from it. So I'll say unlock the layer here. So if I were to do just a little quick working section of this here, and open this. So in this case, I'm just going to say open with current view settings. So I just need to see that cabinet. All right. So here is the cabinet shape, and that was I deliberately avoided catching the sink as part of it. So if I select this, this is an object. All right. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this object, and I'm going to paste in the view that I have into a complex profile editor window. So where do you find that? That is under the options menu, complex profiles, profile manager, or you may find it in a slightly different place in your version of ARCHICAD. There could be element attributes and then a side menu with complex profiles. But here's complex profiles, profile manager is what we want. Now in the profile manager, I can say I'd like to have a custom profile and I'd like to edit it. And when I say edit it, it's going to bring up a working window here. I'll say paste. When I paste in something that is a 3D element like that, that cabinet, it's going to paste in the graphics of the view that I was working in. So in that case, this section. And I'll just say put it in the center of the current view. here. So you can see the shape that we have. Now I would like to put the corner of this on that X, that hotspot, because that's when I draw a complex profile, wherever that X is where my line is. So that's going to be against the wall. Let's just say that's a simple case. And then I'll click outside it to say I've pasted it in. Now, this area here, we don't really want to have it filled with anything. We want it to be empty here. But everything else, these are actually separate little, what do you call it, pieces. Now, I'm not going to do anything too fancy. I'll just leave this as it is with whatever they're representing, but I will save this as a wall, or under the wall type, I'll say save it and give it a name, and we'll call this cabinet profile here. And of course I could edit it. I mean, I could take out the drawer here, you know, I could do other things. But let's just go to the plan and go to the wall tool. And in the wall tool, we're going to go and say, I'd like to use a complex profile wall. And the profile I'm going to use was called cabinet profile here. And let's see that, let's see, I'll just draw a couple of these. All right, so now we have, now we have a corner condition here. Let's just see what this looks like. So I'll just draw a marquee around it so that, we can look at just that area, 3D. Okay, so we'd want to look at the materials of it, but basically the idea is that you create a profile with a shape, and you define the shape. So, you know, perhaps the countertop, we want to be a contrasting thing. Let's go and edit this again. One of the things that I noticed is that it doesn't have any line work here. Let's just see if I select all of the fills here. I can say I'd like to have an outline when I'm looking at this in a section. And in fact, when I save this, we'll see that now we can see the outlines of it. So I basically selected all the fills, which are the solid areas, and said, you know, put an outline on them. And now let me go and select this one, and let's just say that we want it to be contrasting. So I'll say instead of being wood, I'll make this some sort of stone finish marble, something like that. Okay, there, and say save. So now you can see the color has changed just slightly here. Let's go back to that 3D view, and we'll see that this now has a contrasting piece. So the idea is that we're going to take something that helps the eye identify that it's a cabinet. You know, this is of course going maybe the wrong way in the sense that the wall is sort of on the left side, and this is the face, but you know, it's going in around a corner, and we have the cabinet there. Now we're not going to see any dividers where, you know, there would normally be, but in fact that's part of the benefit here, is that we're simply just saying, hey, you know, we're going to have some counters over here. So that's hopefully that answers that question. All right, so Chris says, I might have a brick wall with a rendered wall above it. When I put a door in the brick wall, it only cuts through the brick, not the rendered part. Okay, I'd have to see the context for it, Chris, to be able to help you with that. If you do have two stacked walls and you want the door to cut through the upper part, then you'd probably need to put in an empty hole in the secondary part to be able to see it. So let me just simulate that just briefly, even without two different types of walls. If I go, and this would happen in a stairwell, certainly you might have some situations like this, but I'll go and we'll just do, actually, no, I want to just use a simple wall here. And let's just take a look at this in 3D. All right, so here's a piece of wall, and I'm going to pop in a door. Okay, now let's suppose we had this wall. I'll just drag a copy of it like that. Now, you notice that when I drag the copy, I didn't get the door. That's because there actually is a door there, but the door is set. Let me just undo this. The door is set currently to be linked to the story. So if I said that it's at 0 to the wall base, then when I drag a copy of the wall up, we're going to see two different doors because this door is linked to the base of that wall. Now let's just get rid of this door here and take this door up. So I'll just drag it up here. And what you'll see is that the door exists here, but we haven't actually cut through the upper wall because this upper wall does not have a hole in it. So although the door can float anywhere we want, it is not cutting a hole there. So one quick way to work with this would be to switch, let's see, we can do, used to be use an empty opening here. You can say use an empty opening, and then I can pop in a door. Let's see, we'll say sill to the wall base here. So I'm now popping in an empty opening into this upper wall. So this upper wall here, that's just an opening. So I can go and I can stretch this. So let's say that I stretch it wider and take it. I'm not sure which snap point I should use here, but we'll take that one. Take this one to here. And then I can take the height down to there. And so now what I've got is an empty opening that is cutting out a hole so that the door, which lives in the lower section, can be seen properly up here. And that empty opening is something that you would want to exclude from the schedule because it is it's not really a door, it's just simply a cutout. Now, another workaround for this particular situation would be to make the wall 2 stories. And then, and of course, this is having a door out here. Well, maybe there's a balcony at this level, but a common thing would be to have a window in a stairwell that is straddling 2 stories, and you'd have the same situation. Now, if you have walls of different compositions, you have, I would say, 2 main choices. One is you can make potentially the wall out of a complex profile, so maybe it's stone at the bottom and brick above, or some other detailing that happens, and so the door cuts in through both because it's one wall. Or if you do have stacked elements, then you can cut an extra hole in the one that doesn't have the actual door. So hopefully that answers that. Okay, so this is great stuff for schematic cabinets. I'm glad you like that. And a couple more thanks. All right, so we're going to finish up here. I do see some personal questions. I'm not going to open those up on screen in case somebody's saying something super nice or not nice. I don't know, whatever. Okay, so I think we are at a good point to stop. So we'll do one last mention of the ARCHICAD sale, ARCHICAD training sale. So if you've watched to the end of this whole presentation, then clearly you enjoyed hearing me talk and you learned a few things. Check out archicadtraining.com/sale and you'll see some cool reduced prices on things. Email me if you need some special arrangements. You do have the opportunity to do a 3-payment plan just by entering 3-PAY into the promo code field, and it'll allow you to break that up. This particular sale will run through the end of this year, and I wish you the best for the holidays and for 2020. As always, it's my great pleasure to serve you, to work with you, to help you get the most out of ARCHICAD. Thanks for watching.